Not since October of 1979 has this sight been witnessed in the southern part of the state. The reason for today's appearance of the Amtrak Streamliner is explained by railroad official Al Edelston.
What this really is an inspection trip in the true sense of the word. We received requests from the state of North Dakota and the state of Montana that we come up with the facts and figures on what it would take to run service over the route of the former North Coast Hiawatha.
Okay, we're talking daily service here, semi-weekly?
That really hasn't been determined yet, and that's up to the two states involved, what level of service they actually like to see on the train.
Montana officials want the train reinstated and are willing to pay some of the costs, and would like North Dakota to do the same. However, our state officials, for the most part, are less than enthused, but that opinion could be changing.
A lot of difference between this and the old equipment they used to have on here, believe me. It's unbelievable.
Do you think North Dakota's position will change any because of this?
Well, I think the bottom line is still we have to find out what it's going to cost, and that's one of the purposes of this train traveling through here now.
Any idea how long it'll be before an official position is taken?
We've been talking to the gentlemen about it, and they thought it would be within the next few weeks.
Okay, I know in the last episode I said I was going to talk about the city of Winnipeg or whatever I called it, but I changed my mind. Today, we're going to talk about the North Coast Hiawatha instead, for two reasons. One, it's much more topical, with constant discussions going back to the 80s, and another push just starting. And two, some of the changes I want to make with service to Winnipeg make more sense if I explain some stuff here first. The North Coast Hiawatha traces most of its heritage to the North Coast Limited, the Northern Pacific's premier train between Chicago and Seattle by way of Aurora, the Twin Cities, St. Cloud, Bismarck, Billings, Spokane, and Pasco, the section west of there going to Portland. This train was dropped upon Amtrak's formation in May 1971, but political pressure brought it back in a slightly different form just 2 months later. At first, it ran as an unnamed section of the Empire Builder between Fargo and Spokane 3 days a week. As time went on, service steadily increased and grew independent of the Empire Builder, culminating with daily operation from end to end during certain peak seasons in the late 70s. In off-peak times, the train ran tri-weekly west of Minneapolis. Oh, Amtrak still stopped in Minneapolis at this time. I'm going to switch between the two depending on the exact date I'm talking about. Sorry in advance if it's confusing, but I know people are going to be pedants in the comments if I don't. Anyway, while most of the route was the same as the North Coast Limited, it no longer served Portland and ran on Milwaukee Road tracks east of Minneapolis, hence the new name. The lack of frequency, slow service, and Amtrak's ramshackle state of being meant the train was always a poor performer. Stagflation and the general mood of austerity didn't help the train's chances. While it survived a few attempts to kill it, it and many other Amtrak trains fell victim to the late 70s cuts, and the last North Coast Hiawatha arrived in Seattle on October 8, 1979. This had made many people very angry and has widely been regarded as a bad move. Naturally, the state of Montana immediately began plans to bring back service. These varied in size from tri-weekly service swooping down from Williston, North Dakota, back up to Sandpoint, Idaho, to full daily service from Chicago to Seattle. There was even one to run it over the Milwaukee Road Main east of Miles City into northern South Dakota. So far, all of these have fallen through, with the last study concluding in 2009. That brings us to the present day, where there is once again a study being conducted to restore the North Coast Hiawatha. Like the 2009 study, this focuses on daily service over the entire Chicago to Seattle run. Unlike 2009, however, this comes with a much stronger push not only to restore it and the Pioneer, the other long-distance revival study from 2009, but a general push for more and enhanced long-distance service from the federal government. North Coast Hiawatha was also awarded a $500,000 CID grant to pay for the study, which is being done by the Big Sky Passenger Rail Authority in conjunction with David Evans and Associates. Whether or not things progress afterwards depend on how the election goes this fall. Looking at the past 40 years, I think it's safe to say this will eventually come to fruition, even if the current attempt stalls. Montana just won't quit. So far, the state of Minnesota has stated its support for the project, but hasn't been involved beyond that. With the state redoing its state rail plan in the coming months, now may be the time to state our opinion, as much about the route is still undetermined. Starting from the west coast, the preferred route goes south out of Seattle, then turns east over Stampede Pass, through Yakima, down to Pasco, and then back up to Spokane, where it reconnects with the Empire Builder. This route was chosen as the builder's route through Stevens Pass is capacity constrained at Cascade Tunnel. This route was last served, ironically, by the Empire Builder until 1979. It adds service to a few medium-sized cities in central Washington and reduces overlap with the builder, as well as possibly reducing delays due to less freight traffic, so I'm generally for it. It would take longer, but I've always envisioned the North Coast Hiawatha as sort of a local service to the Empire Builders, and I'm doing air quotes here, express run. Maybe not the best choice of words. Basically, the former serves mid-sized, mid-route cities and connects them to the main hubs, while the latter is geared towards faster service between the larger cities towards the ends. Likewise, I envision switching the Portland section of the builder to this route, instead splitting at Pasco. I'm not opposed to both having it, but if it is going to be a one or the other situation, I figure it makes more sense this way. Speeds up the builder while giving people on the North Coast Hiawatha more options. Another possible shift occurs near Butte, or rather Helena, as some of the track required to serve Butte is out of service. They might restore it, but they're most likely going to serve the state's capital instead. Both cities are about the same size and paths are roughly the same length, so I don't mind going for political brownie points in this case. The route continues on as usual through Bozeman, Billings, and Bismarck. Now back to the local angle. The original service pattern had the North Coast Hiawatha taking the Fargo to Minneapolis section via St. Cloud, while the Empire Builder ran via Wilmer. The builder only switched to the St. Cloud routing in 1979 when the North Coast Hiawatha was discontinued. Bringing the old route back would make it easy to stop in downtown Minneapolis, as well as the U of M Morris. I don't know why, but apart from the Twin Cities, Morris has the most comments on the State Rail Plan interactive map, all of which are asking for passenger rail service. By the way, Minnesota residents, go take the survey if you haven't, link in the description. East of the Twin Cities, the route follows the same path as it did historically, which is also the same path as the Empire Builder and the Borealis take today. While there's no plans to change this, I would like to consider we do something a bit out there and run it via Dubuque, Iowa. This would once again reduce overlap as well as connect cities in northern Illinois to the national network at the price of a slightly longer travel time. This is all pretty unlikely as Canadian National, who owns the line between Dubuque and Rockford, has been playing hardball with IDOT as they tried to start their own Chicago to Dubuque service. Amtrak's starting to swing their regulatory might recently, but who knows if or when they'll try to do it here. And again, I'm literally the only person talking about a St. Paul to Dubuque service, so even if IDOT succeeds, the North Coast Hiawatha is most likely staying the course. But in the off chance it doesn't, there really isn't much Hiawatha left at this point, just St. Paul to La Crosse. Considering Amtrak's avoiding using the name Hiawatha on anything that isn't a Milwaukee to Chicago train, maybe it's time we bring back the North Coast Limited. After all, we don't call the Empire Builder the Empire Hiawatha. The last major change is with the timing. The 2009 study called for an evening departure from Seattle and midday from Chicago. I've shifted both back a few hours to provide connections to the Coast Starlight and trains 516 and 517, the morning cascades to Vancouver. I've made similar adjustments to the Empire Builder, leaving at night and midday respectively, although that's more because both trains happen to get to St. Paul within an hour of each other and I wanted to space them out more. This might cause other problems, but we'll deal with them later. This also adds a connection to the Coast Starlight. This does mean there's some odd arrival and departure times from the West Coast in here, but you can't win them all. What we end up with is an engorged North Coast Limited covering 2,469 route miles over 8 states and serving 40 communities, paired with a slimmed-down, sped-up Empire Builder. Eyeballing the Rail Passenger Association study, it's not unreasonable to think this new train could hit 500,000 riders per year, with minimal collateral damage to the Empire Builder. But what if you live in St. Cloud and still want to go to, say, Grand Forks or Milwaukee? A transfer is technically possible, but not ideal. A dedicated train doesn't really make sense, unless we stretch the endpoints out a bit. Turn it into, say, a Chicago to Winnipeg train? But that's a story for another time.
Today's train originated in Fargo and stopped briefly in Bismarck before heading west for Billings and ultimately Spokane, Washington. Since the track is in fantastic shape, according to Amtrak officials, service could begin next July if the two states can solve their differences. Dave Finger, Meyer Television News, reporting.